he has more lessons and more insights and more knowledge about entrepreneurship than almost anyone I know. So, Bill Gross.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you for supporting me all these years, and thank you for helping me start Idealab. Howard was the very first investor in Idealab when I came up with that crazy idea to do that. And in the years since we started Idealab in 1996, we started more than 100 companies, and we've had a wild ride and lots of lessons learned from doing that. Of those 100 companies, we had more than 300 rounds of financing, so we've worked with many, many people in raising money and learned a lot about that. We directly invested from Idealab $870 million into the companies and helped the companies raise an additional more than $2.5 billion. And of them, we had 35 successful IPOs and acquisitions. We have 25 operating companies right now, and we've had 40 failures. So we've learned a lot of painful lessons from those failures. I want to try and share some of the things I learned that were most important over all those experiences with you. Here are the top 12 lessons that I learned over all those years. And unfortunately, they sound a little bit like motherhood and apple pie, like, well, that's obvious, but they're all harder to do than they are to read and say. But I'll try and delve into a few of them with a little more detail. The first one I think is not that hard to do, be driven by passion and not greed. Now, I learned when I look across all the companies and see the ones that have succeeded versus the ones that haven't, they were mostly led by leaders who were passionate about what they were doing and not trying to just make money. And if you can look into yourself and look into your senior team and see what the driving force is, I would say there's a relatively high correlation between success and that. The other thing that I've learned from the companies that didn't make it was always try and make the cash last longer than you could. Always treating the money that you have like it's your last money now often makes it easier to raise money, by the way, because when people come in and look at your habits and they see your habits of stretching the cash very far, that often makes them very excited to invest. So assuming that you won't be able to get more money and running your company that way is very, very important. We have so many ideas that we had that were great and were just a year or two ahead of their time, either because a broadband penetration was too low or because the market wasn't quite ready for one reason or another. And if only we could have cut the company back a little smaller, a little sooner, we would have made it to that year or 2 years and been a leader in the space we were going after. Because we had the right product, we had the right market, everything was right, we just didn't have enough runway. And again, it's very easy to say this, but it's very hard to do. But it's probably the second most important lesson I could say is trying to stretch your cash. So hiring A people. Everyone will tell you this, that you have to hire A people, but and it's hard to do. There's so much competition for talent. But the one thing that's easier to do than that, easier than finding the A people, but emotionally tougher, is as soon as you know someone's not working out, as soon as you discover someone's not an A person, show them the door. And letting inferior hires linger is so commonplace. And the number of times that we try and give advice to CEOs to try and take people who are poor performers and sapping so much energy from their company to let those people go. I feel like if there's one thing that I leave you with today, give you a little bit more courage to take one low-performing person and show them the door in your company, that could make a huge difference to your company. And it's actually not that hard to do except for the emotional part. I say except for. That's a big part. But that might help your company a lot. Mean what you say and say what you mean at all times. So many times I learned early on, I was so enthusiastic about things, I maybe exaggerated about things, or was so optimistic about outcomes, and I learned over time to be so much more realistic and so much more exceeding my commitments and trying to have everybody on my senior team do that. And it works out so much better to do that. I was here for the hiring session earlier from Netflix, and she was talking a little bit about when you're interviewing people and you want to see if they really have the entrepreneurial gene, you want to make sure that they're not just kind of like, there was a period in 1999, 2000 when everybody was rushing from other industries into the internet because they saw people becoming millionaires, and so many of the wrong people came in. Same thing in your startups today. You want to make sure that people are coming into your company for the right reason, and you really want to screen them and really understand, have them understand what your company is going to be like and what the risks are. And I almost spend part of my time recruiting someone, and then once I feel I want that person, I spend a lot of time unrecruiting them, meaning like sort of pushing them away with tests to make sure they really want to be there and make sure they really understand what this company is going to be about. And it makes for a better culture in the company, and it makes for better people, and it's hard to do. But it's really valuable to get people that are always, you your expectations that you set for them, you end up being able to exceed them at your company. Waffling. It's so easy to try and make perfect decisions, and you've heard this before too, but a decision that's 80% good but made swiftly is way better than one that's 100% but you never get around to it. And setting up, especially, we're all startups here. Companies that are startups need to move more quickly. That's how we beat the bigger incumbents, and we have to try and make decisions faster. And you want to be as right as you can, but you want to move more quickly. And I found that the moving more quickly is the way you can slay the Goliaths, and very, very important thing to do. A few more things that I'm just going to go through, but I'm going to dive in deeper onto the last three. Admitting your mistakes openly and changing your mind. I pride myself on one of the things that I'm good at as having what I call low inertia, meaning when I see something that's better or smarter, I just switch to it. I don't really hold on to things very dearly. That's actually pretty scary to a lot of people. A lot of people want things to stay stable for a lot longer. But I think in a startup, you have to change your mind periodically. And I think you should be very open about admitting that to your people and explaining that to your team, explaining why you're changing, and admit it when you make a mistake and tell why you're moving on and why you're doing something differently. And I think that's very powerful and also very important for success. And we've seen the companies that linger and are so worried about the emotional trauma of changing, even though they know they need to make a change, that they end up getting hurt by the competitor who does make the change fast. And I think having low inertia as a startup is very important. Give credit where credit is due, and give credit to other people all the time, in your company, around your company, to your board members, to everybody you can. It's amazing how well that has worked. And again, I have the purview to look across 100 companies, sort of like First Round has a chance to look at 150 companies. And when we look at the companies that are firing on all cylinders and the ones that are not, very often the companies that aren't doing as well, they're just not giving credit, they're not celebrating things, the CEOs aren't sharing the limelight with other people, and the CEOs and the teams that do, I think, are the ones that succeed more. Surround yourself with people who know more than you. I love doing that. I have no not invented here syndrome. I love having other people around who teach me new things, and it's a really, really important thing, I think, in a startup. And getting your other team to feel that same way. A lot of times people are scared when you bring new, strong people onto the team because they feel threatened, and somehow you have to try and instill a culture or get across to them that they're going to be made to shine better and they're going to have a better outcome. Especially if you do the next thing, which is share the upside. Also in the Netflix conversation, she was talking about how use the equity that you have to attract people. By the way, using the equity you have, we often would make offers to people in companies that were tiered offers, $100,000 plus this much equity, $125,000, and less equity, $150,000, and even lower equity. And we almost viewed it as an intelligence test. If the person didn't take the $100,000 and the high equity, they almost shouldn't be at the company. But using equity liberally to really incent people, excite people, to test people, to understand where they're coming from, really, I think, is important. It's the one thing that you have to give in larger amounts, to give higher stakes than someone could get at a bigger, safer company. And I think using that liberally, again, when we look at the companies and we look across all the CEOs, the ones who gave equity more liberally, even though it might have diluted us more or diluted them more, are the ones that succeeded more because everybody felt more of an owner, more of a stake in the company. And I feel that giving that bigger equity stake, unlocks human potential that is there but not otherwise seen. It's almost like latent energy that you can uncork by giving bigger equity stakes. And it's one of the reasons why I started Idealab in the first place. I was running a company, Knowledge Venture. We had grown to 250 people. And by definition, once you're 250 people, you can't give each new person 1% because there isn't enough to go around unless you do a producers-like thing. And 1% is a magical number. Now, you can't give everybody in your company 1%. I know only senior people have that. But those people who get 1% or 0.5% or can get a significant stake of a company is why I wanted to start Idealab, so I could start new companies where each time I was minting this fresh, new 100% equity pool where there was this large stake to give out to employees. And it's amazing to see how when you give out those big stakes, again, most of you have seen this, so I'm mostly preaching to the choir, but I'm urging you that giving bigger equity stakes really, really unlocks motivation. So let's share the upside. Get complementary skills. So I have the skills that I have. I like thinking of ideas. I have low inertia. I have this. And along with that come a whole bunch of weaknesses. And those weaknesses are almost by definition have to be there because you can't be all things in one human being, in one body. So you really have to surround yourself with the opposite skills. And it's very, very difficult. This was a lesson I didn't learn until I was probably 35 years old, deep into Knowledge Venture when Knowledge Venture was already starting to have some challenges. And we brought in an outside consultant to help the management team work a little bit better. And I learned this. And I'll tell tell you, I'm going to dive into this more deeply in a moment. But this was hugely valuable to me to understand how to get along with the other people that I brought in who were opposite me, because I didn't like those people. Those people weren't like me, and I was rejecting them, and I had to learn how to embrace them, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. But it's very, very valuable as a startup to get that going, and I think it happens that it starts becoming acute once you get to 10 or 20 people. It's severe when you get to 50 people, and it's a nightmare when you get to 100 people, where you really have to start learning how to live with the other complementary skills to yourself. Iterate like crazy. Coming up with ways to do small experiments and find answers very quickly. That's a very popular thing now with the lean startup and MVP and all that, but I'm going to give you a specific example of how to really find a way to iterate with the lowest amount of work possible to try and get your answers. And then finally building a culture of innovation, because that's what I try and do the most. That's what I love doing the most, is innovating and doing new things. How do you convince people to do that? How do you convince people to take those risks? And I'll tell you some specifics on that. So let me jump to the complementary skills. So there's many different types of Myers-Briggs and other tests you can take and ways you can group people, but this is one particular cut at a way to group orthogonal traits in people. The entrepreneur, which is most of you here, it's certainly me here. Now, no one person is just one of these. You have skills in all of these areas, just to differing degrees. So for example, I'm really high on the entrepreneurial skill. I'm okay on the producer skill. The producer skill is the ability to do something, to finish something, to push a project forward, to actually get the results done. Producer is usually the salesperson or the person who's the bull in the china shop, who you say, go do that, and they'll run through walls to get that done. The administrator is more of the bureaucratic skill. I'm actually negative on the administrator skill. I'm anti that. Like I just rebel at anything about that requires any planning or organization or process. But the administrator skill is very important. And then the integrator skill, and that's the skill that brings people together, that solves arguments, that takes opposing viewpoints and makes them get to a middle ground, that stops fighting, and so on. And I'm actually okay on that. I've gotten better at that over the years. So I would say I'm a strong E, a moderate P, a negative A, and an okay I. But you need to have all of these things in balance. And let me explain to you why and how you get those other skills and how you work with them. So when you start a company, you almost by definition, a company only starts with E. You can't start a company with A. An administrator can't start a company because they're just putting process in place. They wouldn't do anything. And the I skill can't start a company because they just care about feelings and helping people work together. That doesn't get a company started. But the E gets the company started. But the E, and sort of the classic story of an entrepreneur who doesn't know how to finish anything, an E alone will start with a great idea, get it going, and then eventually flail and fail and burn out if it can't get anything done. Somehow the company, after it's started, it could be in month 2, it could be in month 10, but somewhere along the way, it's got to get the P skill in the company. Now, it can come from the E person if they have that skill, but it's got to get that, because otherwise it won't make the product, it won't ship it, it won't answer the phone, it won't deal with customers. You have to get that skill in the company, and that usually is in getting a partner or a co-founder or someone else, a COO or someone else who has that other skill to make things happen and move things along, and you have to get that skill in the company. And then eventually, though, even with P, even if you start making products and start making sales, eventually that company will fail too once it starts growing, because the wheels will fall off the bus. Eventually, phones will stop getting answered, and customers will start getting angry, and support problems will happen, and something will break, and unless some administrative skill comes into the company. Now, the P person might have that too, the person you bring in who has that, or you might find it somewhere else. But you've got to get that A into the company, because otherwise things will break. And then eventually, even with A in the company, you will fail too if you don't bring I in. And the reason is these 3 people hate each other's guts because they all have such different views on the world. And I'll give you an example of the different views on the world that they could have. Let's say you have the classical extreme 4 of these people sitting in a room, and they're looking at the window, and there's like a smudge on the window over there. The P would look at the window and say, we got to get that window cleaned. Let's just go have all the windows in the building clean. I'll get someone doing that right away. The A will look at that and say, there's a scratch on that window or a smudge there. Why don't we have a form? And when someone sees something wrong, they can fill that out. That will get sent over to HR. That will get processed. The person's thinking about, how do I put the process in place to take care of that? The E looks at the window and sees a parking lot across the way and says, I wonder what we could put over there to build a new business outside. Doesn't even see the scratch, doesn't see the window or anything. Is just looking at the next frontier. And the I looks over there and says, I wonder what those 3 people are thinking. Doesn't even see the window either and just cares about the people and how they can bring together. And you can see how different people just look at the world completely differently. They look at the exact same situation, and they look at it completely differently. But you want all 4 people in the room and all 4 of those people on your management team. And if you find the right eye, and if you learn some eye yourself, as I have a little bit over the years, you can help bring this together, and you can help have these 4 people who would normally hate each other's guts, or these 3 people, get along. And it's really, really instrumental to making a company successful. And it's really important for innovation, as I'll get to in a moment, because you have to have different viewpoints at the table to try and make success and deal with the failures that inevitably happen when you're trying to take bold chances. So then on the testing and the fast iterating. So I really urge all of our companies to test, find small tests, find simple things, and just test the core proposition. Don't build out the whole thing, because your scarce resource is cash and time, and you want to find the absolute simplest test. And we've come up with ways at Idealab to do surveys inside of our building, to walk on the street corner on Colorado Boulevard in Old Town Pasadena and just walk up to people and do tests with fake mock-ups of iPhone apps. We come up with the simplest things that are just like screen captures and almost nothing. You want to have almost no work. And I'll give you this example on one company that we did that was extremely successful. Cars Direct, which we started in 1999. We were trying to figure out a way to test this proposition back then. This was when people were even still scared of putting credit cards online. People were worried about, Amazon was mostly just selling books and CDs. People were worried about the possible fraud with credit cards. And we were going to see if people would buy a car online, just to see if people would put a $1,000 deposit or $250 deposit on a car, sight unseen, to have it delivered at their house in a flatbed truck and have the transaction completed there. And we hired someone as a founding executive to do this Cars Direct test, and we had 90 days that we allocated, and basically $50,000 or $80,000 to try and do this test to find out if people would do that. Because if they weren't, we weren't going to start the company. So we were trying to figure out how to do the simplest test possible. We just wanted to put up a website and see if people would click through and put in a deposit, sight unseen, to buy the car. And after a few weeks, he came back to me, and he was working on the site, and he was working with our internal programmers, and he told me as an update, well, I'm talking to Ford, I'm trying to get a source and supply of cars, I'm trying to get all this arranged. And I said, we don't need to worry about getting cars. We might not even go forward with this. Don't worry about a source of supply. And I had to convince him to stop working on that. We're just testing the proposition. So he went off, and he dropped doing that. And then when he came back to me a month later, well, I'm working on the car configurator so people can use the drop-down to configure all their options. We don't need to make a configurator. Just let them type in what they want. We're going to go take that printout and drive down to the Honda Auto Mall in Monrovia, buy the car at retail, sell it to them at cost. We're going to lose $4,000 on each car. We don't care about that. We're trying to find out if someone will go through with it. And I finally convinced him. I remember on the 80th day, we had 90 days, we wanted to get this done. I said, just put the site live and let's just see what happens. And I remember on a Thursday night, I went home and the site went live. When I came in on Friday morning, I said, how did it go? And he said, we sold 4 cars last night. And I said, hurry up and turn the site off. We don't want to sell any more cars. But we had proven what we wanted to find out, which was 4 people would put $1,000 on their credit card to buy a car, which we went and bought and delivered in a flatbed truck, completed the experience, learned everything about it. And then we built the company. And then, of course, we had to go get source and supply and build a website, build a configurator. But coming up with the simplest way to just find out, does your customer like what you have? In whatever fake form you can even. Now, you don't want to cheat the customer. We were willing to go through with the transaction. We weren't lying to them. We were going to give them the car that they configured by typing in what they wanted. We just did it the hard way. We had to automate it to make a business. But that was the work the next year to build that business, and then the business grew. And then Bob Briscoe, who is here today, built the company up into Internet Brands and recently sold the company for more than $600 million to Hellman Freeman. And it was a great outcome. But it all started with that very simple test. And that's what I really urge all of our companies to do, is find very simple ways to test the smallest things and then iterate more quickly. And then on the innovation front, how do you make a structure for success? I want to go through this real fast because we can email the presentation out. I want to give you some time for questions. But the number one thing, and I think this is obvious, but people follow the incentives that you set. If people see in your company that there's punishment or firing or any loss of anything, if people take a risk and fail, then they won't do it. So you have to set up structures that make it very clear that you can take those risks and that's okay. And that was one of the things, the whole way we structured Idealab, is people could take chances on these things, and if the project doesn't work out, they can move to another project. I urge you when you try and set up experiments in your company that you want to have people take bold chances on, that they have safety nets to go to other things. If the idea failed because they didn't work hard or they didn't execute or whatever, it's okay to get rid of them. Everybody will know that. But if the idea failed because they had a bold idea, but that idea just didn't work, you want to reward that. You want to write down all the learnings. You want to have a post-mortem. You want to share that with the company. You want to don't hold your head down. You want to hold your head up. You want to have a company meeting and say, look at the chance this person took. It didn't work out. Here's why, but here's what we learned. Sometimes when we have things that we fail, we still patent some of the things we did along the way, even though the idea didn't work out. And then maybe 4 years later, 2 years later, that might be wildly useful for something. So you really have to make sure the incentives are in place so that experience is making a mistake and learning from it. But if you don't learn from it, then that's terrible. And a few more things on this. You need to if you don't have this sense that there's a comfort with the idea failing, an organization won't take the risks. They just won't take the risks that are necessary to really make breakthroughs. And there are times when failure is not acceptable. And you need to define that in your company. So an example here, I put at the bottom. Whoops. Sorry about that. One of the examples I said, if you could go back to that second to last slide for me, is an example where failure is not acceptable would be where it has to do with a customer. Never letting a failure touch a customer. That could be a policy you might have in your company where the risks that we want to take on internal projects or in separate areas because we don't want to fail the customer ever. That's a perfectly valid thing to set up. Whatever you do, just make very explicit what type of failure you accept and what type you won't. And I think you can really encourage people to take big innovation risks. And then finally, telling stories about past failures in front of your company really makes people comfortable about taking big risks now because they'll know that it's okay. So again, that's an important example to set. And we try and do that in our company. In company meetings, we talk about things that we tried that didn't work out just as comfortably as we talk about things that were wild successes. And people see that. And it's very important to know, and I think you all know this, that people watch very carefully. So it's not what you say, it's how you actually act. So no matter what you say about taking risks, they're going to watch how the organization actually behaves, and they're going to use that as their guideline for being innovative. And I think taking risks, again, is the whole thing that every one of you here in this room can do to beat a bigger competitor. So if you set an environment that makes it comfortable for your people to do that, that's how you can win. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience. Yes.
That's what happens. See, that's what happens that me and Chris aren't there anymore. That we're the E-type.
So you hire these brilliant people, then say don't code, let's do experiments. How do you resolve that? How do you hire the smartest folks, but then don't have them work on the things they're hired for?
Well, what we do is sometimes those experiments require code, of course. They're just not coding the whole system to do everything. They're doing the code to figure out which system we're going to code. And we're trying to figure out what's the customer proposition that resonates the most so that your coding is not going to get thrown out. And that's what we try and pitch to the people. So they are doing work. I mean, even making the websites for the mock-up of Cars Direct or going out on Colorado Boulevard and doing tests with iPhone things, we're just not building all the back-end or other infrastructure so that we know what we're trying to build. So we still recruit people because, well, again, it's a self-selecting process. We recruit people who want to work on lots of iterative things. Maybe that leaves us out of certain types of programmers, but we get some programmers who are really good at that, and I think that's what it's going to take to make the company succeed long term. Yes? Yeah. Well, of course there have to be some, but I would like to think that you can take almost anything, no matter how big, and find some way to break it down to some part of the core proposition to test your premise. It's not going to test the whole thing perfectly, but it's going to give you enough sense that you're going to take your precious capital, and then even more than your capital, your bandwidth of your people, to go focus on that for a concerted effort. So I think there's some way to find that element of the core customer proposition that you can find a way to test. And I guess I pride myself on thinking of that. If I ever could help you do that, I'd be happy to if I could apply myself. But I think everybody can do it. I don't think you need outside skill for that. You just have to be motivated that that's worthwhile effort, and then you could find a way. Yes?
Of all the tests you've done, and you've certainly done many over the years, was there one that
Yeah.
that you look back and go, wow, I'm glad we caught that? What was that?
That's a very good question. I haven't thought about that, but I want to think about that. I'm going to be here right after this, so let me come up with one, and I'll come talk to you about it. Yeah. Right here? Yeah. I think we have time for one more, right here.
So, out of curiosity, you've done a test where the result is somewhat, let's say, moderate.
Yeah.
In response, and you decide you don't want to go forward with it. Any thoughts on how you let those folks know that have signed up and are
Yeah.
maybe expecting some sort of service? How you sort of let them know?
Oh, how you let those people who signed up. Well, what I always try and do is I always try and give them the service. You know, whatever offering I was making to them, I try and give it to them. Now, if it's something that you have to continue for years, you wouldn't be able to do that. In which case, I always am honest with the people up front that we haven't done it yet, that this is a test. You're going to have this available for 60 days. So I don't want to ever trick someone and have them say afterwards, you duped me into doing this. So that might skew the results if you're that honest with people, but I feel it's more important to be honest with the people than skew it that way. All right, great. Thank you again very much. It's really an honor to be here. Thank you.